Okay, I get it. History says don't take a tight end in the first round. You know who else says that? Me. I've been saying that for years. What if I'm wrong? What if the data is leading us somewhere that isn't actually exactly what's happening? I dig into it because it's looking more and more like the Packers want to take a first round tight end. So is it as bad an idea as, frankly, I have said it is? We're going to dig into all of that on today's show.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Today's episode brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Locked On Packers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when they use the promo code Locked On in the game store. So, this tight end business. I have said on the show, and it is supported by a lot of historical evidence, do not take tight ends in the first round. And for me, the biggest reason has always been not that they're not valuable when they hit, because tight ends are extremely valuable when you have a good one. There's just, in a given season, usually only 3, 4, maybe 5 that actually matter, that actually affect the game in a meaningful way. And so, okay, you might get that guy, you might not. And history says, draft history says, the league is actually really bad at deciding who is really good and who is not. You look at other positions like receiver, like offensive tackle, like corner, like pass rusher. They tend to be much better at ordering these players. Linebacker is another one where they're not particularly good at it. Running back is another one. So this is about risk profiles. If it is less likely at any given position for you to be right in your evaluation, and every GM thinks that their eval is right, but you have to take into the historical context. You understand that the gamble at tight end is historically unsupported. The league has been really bad at ordering tight ends. In fact, the most value that teams have found is in the third round. Well, that's a little skewed because Travis Kelce, third rounder. Mark Andrews, third rounder. The best players of late have been third rounders. That's not because, there's some third round magic. George Kittle was found in the 5th round. That means the good tight ends are in the 5th round. Don't confuse correlation with causation, but it is the case that teams have not been good lately drafting tight ends. So, 25 tight ends. I dug into the data a little bit here. 25 tight ends have been taken since 2000. Part of this, I think, is a sample problem. That's just not many players at all. 25 tight ends since 2000, okay? 22 years. 25 tight ends. 27 receivers have gone in the first round since 2016. Since 2016. So there have been way more receivers drafted. So we have much better data on what happens in the first round. That's just the first round. So we have so much better data on those guys and their outcomes. And let me explain what I mean. So go back to the first half of that list. Okay, 25 guys. Let's take the first 13. A little more than half, but we got to round somewhere. The first 13, Bubba Franks, Anthony Becht, Todd Heap, Jeremy Stevens, Jeremy Shockey, Daniel Graham, Dallas Clark, Kellen Winslow, Ben Watson, Heath Miller, Vernon Davis, Mercedes Lewis, and Greg Olsen. Of those 13 players, 9 of them made Pro Bowls. 9. So if you drafted a tight end between 2000 and 2006 in the first round, chances were really, really good that you got a really, really good player. That is pretty crazy. And in that span, first round tight ends became multi-time Pro Bowlers. Multi-times. Bubba Franks, 3-time Pro Bowler. Todd Heap, 2-time Pro Bowler. Jeremy Shockey, 4-time Pro Bowler. Heath Miller, 2-time Pro Bowler. Vernon Davis, 2-time Pro Bowler. Greg Olsen, 3-time Pro Bowler. 6 multi-time Pro Bowlers of 13 guys. Almost a 50% rate, you got a multi-time Pro Bowl player. Those guys are really, really valuable. The most valuable pass catcher in football last year was Travis Kelce. The year before, the most valuable pass catcher in football was Travis Kelce. If you go back to 2019, 5 of the top 10 most valuable pass catchers were tight ends. It's Kittle, it's Kelce, it's Andrews, it's Waller. It is these top end guys. They can carry your passing game. Greg Olsen was the passing game in Carolina for a number of years. Now take the last 15 years of the last 15 first round QB or tight ends, goodness. Dustin Keller, Brandon Pettigrew, Jermaine Gresham, Tyler Eifert, Eric Ebron, OJ Howard, Evan Ingram, David Njoku, Hayden Hurst, TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant, Kyle Pitts. Now, those guys have not finished their careers, at least for about half of this list. So they could become better players than they are. And Kyle Pitts has already made a Pro Bowl. But in the last 15 years, the chances of you hitting on a multi-time Pro Bowler, remember it was 50% from 2000 to 2006. Now it's 17%. TJ Hawkinson is the only guy since Jermaine Gresham to go to 2 Pro Bowls. So, for a stretch, depending on where you stopped the set, the league was really good. The data was telling you absolutely take a tight end. But over the last 15 years, when there's been a lot fewer players taken overall in terms of year to year, you have materially worse outcomes. To me, that says that's noise. If you went into the first round and you got Jeremy Shockey, you'd be thrilled. If you got Todd Heap, if you got Greg Olsen, if you got Vernon freaking Davis, you would be thrilled that you got those players. So, okay, part of this equation, right, is if you need a pass catcher and you're going to take a pass catcher, it actually makes more sense to take a receiver because you're more likely to get value. You need more of them on the field because you're going to play 3 receivers at once most of the time instead of 1 tight end. And so, okay, it makes sense. Value the receivers. Well, this is a unique class. Mina Kimes, I thought, made a great point on this on NFL Live last week when she said part of the reason it doesn't make as much sense to take a tight end is because there is an opportunity cost. You could be taking a receiver. Well, if you can't get Jackson Smith-Njigba, let's say Jackson Smith-Njigba goes like 7 or 6 or something like that, and the Packers just they couldn't even trade up to get him. And you're sitting there. In this particular draft, who are the guys that you're going to draft instead? This has to be I don't like absolutes. Never take tight ends in the first round. I generally don't. This is a weird draft. Now, it is the case that the value is on day 2. This is a deep class, and the Packers have at least 1, maybe 2 top 50 picks in addition to their first round pick. And so there's a really good chance you're going to get a really good tight end that is there for you at 42 or 45 or both. But here is where this is unique this year. It's not a great offensive tackle class. Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, those guys are probably going to be off the board. Peter Skoronski, who I don't love as a prospect anyway, probably going to be off the board. So you don't really have a clean fit at tackle, premium position. Pass rusher. I don't particularly love Lucas Van Ness. I like him. I would get it in terms of the athletic profile and what you could get out of him. But he's not better to me as a prospect than someone like Michael Mayer. He is clearly a step below that. Now, Miles Murphy, if he's there, take him. But I think that athletic profile, he's going to go in the top 10, top 12. So if you're sitting there and there's not good value at pass rusher, there's not good value at offensive tackle, Jackson Smith-Njigba's off the board, we're saying in this scenario, now your opportunity cost argument is kind of out the window because the premium positions are off the board. Corner, I don't think there's a clean fit at corner. I don't think there's gonna be a player there that's gonna make the Packers go, we have to draft this guy, because I think Witherspoon and Gonzalez are probably gonna be off the board. So what are you left with? Like, your opportunity cost is essentially nothing because you're not giving up the chance to draft another good player. And here's the last thing that I think is important. This is the NFL.com grading scale. So to be a first round grade, this is how they describe that player. Talented prospect with above average physical and positional traits in all areas. He's a likely rookie starter with expectations of becoming a good NFL starter who ranks in the top 10 at his position. That's not good enough to me. I need to believe he can be better than that. I need to believe there is I don't want to say a good chance, because for there to be a good chance, like, you probably have to be a top 5 kind of player. And I just don't, that person is not in this draft. And I don't think that's what you have to be in order for you to be a legitimate tight end in the first round. But here's what I think you have to be. This is what they're considering a top 10 kind of player, top 10 kind of player grade. Physical attributes and skill levels that should create mismatches for opponents on a fairly regular basis. He's a high ceiling prospect with Pro Bowl ability and should quickly emerge as one of the top players on the team. Can this player be a Pro Bowl player? And not just a Pro Bowl player, a potential multi-time Pro Bowl player. So you can't take a high floor kind of player. Someone like Brandon Pettigrew. If you look at a lot of the players that turned out to just be okay, they were high floor players. Guys that like, okay, this guy can come in and be a blocker for us, but not much else. No, you have to be able to impact the passing game in a meaningful way to be this kind of player. You need to have Pro Bowl potential. And it doesn't have to be in a vacuum. It can be in the offense. And so this is why I think this is an appropriate conversation for the Packers. And I understand the EV conversation about the first contract, that it takes tight ends a little bit longer to get up to speed. And so you're losing out. Like, there's actually really good value for tight ends on the second contract because they don't get paid like receivers, but they impact the game. The really good ones do. The guys like Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Dallas Goedert, Mark Andrews, the guys that are on those big money second contracts can and do impact the game like receivers, and sometimes more. Now, Travis Kelce, outlier. Let's not bank on outliers here. But if you can get a guy, if you think Michael Mayer or Dalton Kincaid, someone like that, can be a multi-time Pro Bowler, one of the 5 best players at the position, someone who you can funnel your passing game mostly through. Can he be your pass catcher too? And a good one, someone that you can call plays for, run routes for, and go win. I think those kinds of players, and you have to be a top tier prospect, are worth first round consideration. If you could get Jeremy Shockey in the first round, you do it. If you can get Todd Heap in the first round, you do it. And if you knew you were getting George Kittle, or you thought you were getting George Kittle in the first round, you would do it. Now, I'm not saying this to justify what I think the Packers are going to do, but the fact that I think the Packers are going to do this or want to do this is part of why I went back and thought, okay, let me actually look and see what the data actually says. Let me see what the data really tells us. I think the data on second look, and for me, this is like fifth look, because I've been like obsessed with this kind of historical hit rate stuff. I think that the numbers have been lying to us a little bit. And that has made me more open to this idea than in previous years. And maybe I am just talking myself into it. But I think when you look at a run like 2000 to 2006, you go, okay, well, that is probably way above what it should be. And the hit rate since then, with the same number of players, by the way, is way below probably what it should be. And so maybe the longer this goes, the more tight end is really just like other positions. I don't know, but I do know that a good tight end, a really good tight end, is extremely, extremely valuable. And I know this. The Packers have not had a player where from 11 personnel, 3 receivers on the field, 1 tight end, they can call anything and feel like their tight end can do everything. They trust him to block with a plum, and they trust him to go run routes and get open and make plays. They have not had that person in the Matt LaFleur era. They have not had that person since Jermichael Finley, probably. And so, like, for the Packers, especially with the way that this offense is currently constructed, I think it is a different case, and these decisions do not get made in a vacuum. More on that in a second. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile app before, and if you think, hey, draft a tight end in the first round, no problem, not an issue. You can do that in this game. If you think, hey, I'm going to sign that underrated tight end to a big money deal, and I believe it's going to pay off for me, you can do that in this game. And you can do things like hire and fire coaches, training staffs, scouting staffs, all sorts of things to build the dynasty that you think you are capable of building, all on an app that you don't need Wi-Fi to play. That's the beauty of it. Take it on an airplane, take it on the subway, take it in a car ride. Maybe you're not going to get great service. You can do that. Locked On Packers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when they use the promo code Locked On in the game store. That's Locked On, so make sure to check it out today. Download the app in the App Store or visit ultimate-gm.com to look it up. Ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. And thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen every day. Everydayers. Thank you, by the way, for being an everydayer. Tomorrow on the show, we have to talk some more draft stuff, but we're not going to be talking tight ends. We're going to be talking a defensive position we have not talked a lot about this off season, but it is sneaky important. Maybe not even sneaky, but it is definitely important. We're going to talk about it on the show tomorrow. So one of the reasons why I wanted to go back and look at the numbers, first of all, is anytime there is a narrative out there, I immediately want to go, are we sure? Like, one of my favorite writers is a woman by the name of Emily Oster, and she wrote this book that my wife read during our first pregnancy, Expecting Better. And she's an economist by trade. She's an Ivy League professor, and she went back and she looked at the underlying data around studies that drive conventional wisdom. Oh, pregnant women not allowed to have coffee. Pregnant women not allowed to drink, all these things. Okay, but what does the data really tell us? And she went back and looked at the underlying data, not just the conclusions from that data. And so I was, I think that kind of stuff is interesting. And so when I hear something, even that I've said, I am not too proud to go, okay, but am I right? Are we sure? Like I went through the same evolution on EPA. I was not in love with that stat, in part because it wasn't telling me what I wanted it to. And the more I looked at it and the more I dug into it, the more I was like, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Is it perfect? No. But it's certainly better than I thought. And I think this tight end data is similar. But one of the other reasons is because I think the Packers would like to take a first round tight end. Why do I think that? So I went back and I looked at the top 30 visits that the Packers have had. And I broke them down by where they have taken multiple positions and had them in for visits. They have had 3 tight ends in for a visit, all projected to be first round picks or borderline first round picks in the case of Darnell Washington. They have had 3 edge rushers who are projected in the late first, early second, in the 40s, maybe. They have had 3 middle round safeties in. They've had 3 day 3 running backs. This is not espionage. This is not subterfuge. Go back and look at last year. And Jason Hirschhorn wrote about this over at The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. America's guest, Jason Hirschhorn. Go back and look at the top 30 visits in 2022. They had in 3 late first, early second round receivers, including Christian Watson, who they tried to trade back into the first to get. They had 4 projected middle round receivers in for visits, including Romeo Doubs and Samori Toure. And they had Devontae Wyatt in, and they had Tariq Carpenter in, and they had Rasheed Walker in on top 30s. 6 of their top 30 visits wound up on this football team. That is pretty incredible. And even though Sean Ryan was not a top 30 visit, they brought in Ed Ingram, Abraham Lucas, and Tyler Smith, who were projected day 2 players, all day 2 on the Athletic Consensus Board. Green Bay went in with a plan. And you don't always get to execute your plan, because I truly believe in 2020, they wanted to get a receiver. It was their plan to get a receiver. Their plan did not go to plan. Last year, their plan went pretty much to plan. They were able to do that. Now, here's the other side of this. Go back and look at the first round picks. There's, Brian Gutekunst had some quotes after that. You can go back and in retrospect, you go, okay, that seems like a thing that maybe he was more open to. And actually in real time, I think a lot of us, myself included, were going, Goody seems pretty open to this, like to be this on top of it. And look, he should be at the time saying, why wouldn't we take a QB? It's a good quarterback draft. We should be investigating all of it. And they were, and they did. They did in 2019. But Jair Alexander said after the draft, he had very little contact with the Packers. In 2019, the Packers said they clued in to Rashawn Gary at the combine. They knew in February he was their guy. Now, they looked at a lot of other pass rushers. There's a lot of heat on Brian Burns and Montez Sweat and some of these other guys. It wasn't the same with Rashawn Gary, same with Darnell Savage. We had no indication they liked Eric Stokes. Very little contact through the process. Quay Walker, we had no indication they were going to take a first-round linebacker. They did not interview a bunch of other ones. They have kept some of these first-round guys. Jordan Love, same deal. Now, we knew that they were open to the idea, but there was not a ton of smoke around these first-round quarterbacks. The first-round players have not had as much heat around them. So does that mean that the board just didn't fall the way that they wanted it to fall? Or is this part of a strategy? I think more likely they have felt, because they've moved up, they traded back up for Jair Alexander. I don't think they thought they'd be in a position to get him. And they were. And so they took him. Eric Stokes, Brian Gutekunst said after they took him in his post-draft press conference, we didn't think he'd be on the board. We had him much higher than he ended up going. And they said early in the draft, they were like, hey, if this guy keeps falling, we're going to take him. And so I believe when they say that they go best player available at times, they moved back up for Darnell Savage. I don't know that they felt like they were going to have a chance to get him, so they moved up for him. It may just be that's the way the board broke and they were like, we actually really like this guy. Or it could be part of a strategy where they don't want to give too much away. Now, I think that might be giving them a little too much credit, frankly. And also with these other combine visits, they seem to do a pretty good job of giving some of this stuff away. And that's just like, it'd be weird if they didn't for their first round pick, but they do for everyone else. I think some of these picks just sort of happen to work out that way. There is a pretty clear trend here. And even if you go back to combine visits, and I wrote a piece about this for Acme Packing Company a couple of years ago, and it still continues to be true. If you look at the positions where they spend the most time with at the combine, when you had official combine, you basically had, it was like a top 30 visit. You had official visits, official meetings. If you looked at the positions where they had those meetings, even if they didn't meet with the guy, like in 2019, when they met with every pass rusher in that class, they didn't meet with Rashawn Gary specifically at the combine. I don't believe, but he was their guy. They didn't need to vet him. They were already ready to go. They vetted everyone else to make sure that they weren't making a mistake. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. But if you go back and look, okay, a bunch of, defensive linemen in a draft where they take a defensive line, these sorts of things tend to be where they allocate the resources. And I've always believed that's the way to do it. That is the smart thing to do. Every team knows what you're looking for. Every team knows the Packers could use another pass catcher, could use some depth at offensive line, could use a safety, could use a tight end. Every team knows that. It's not a secret. And even if you think, oh, maybe they like a tight end here, maybe they want to draft the tight end in the first round, that doesn't preclude the Packers from drafting Myles Murphy or Lucas Van Ness or Paris Johnson Jr. if that guy is high on their board and available to them. So I just don't think there's any reason to hide it, because the draft is always going to break in a weird way. It so rarely goes exactly the way that we expect it to go. So this is just something to keep an eye on. I think they want to take a tight end in the first. That doesn't mean they will. That doesn't mean they will. If we look at those top 30 visits, they want to take a tight end in the first, an edge rusher in the second, if they can get 42, and then at 45, they take a receiver, probably Jalen Hyatt, a safety in the middle rounds, a running back on day 3. That's what I've got figured out so far. I think that's the plan. That makes sense, by the way. That's another reason why I think that's the plan, is because that's what makes sense. But you also have to be flexible with your plan. Just like in fantasy football, you chart out, okay, this is where I think the draft is strong. Okay, I think running back first, then I can go receiver on the turn, all that stuff. NFL teams do that stuff too. Now, it doesn't always play out the way that you want, just like your fantasy draft. But you go in going, okay, this is where we think we can attack this draft. This is where we can wait. This is where we can be aggressive. Let's do this. It's all part of the pre-draft process. All right. Thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen every day. Every dayers. Tomorrow on the show. All right. I'm going to spoil it. We're going to talk about the defensive line. Ooh, sexy. I know, right? So sexy. But it's an important position, and it's a position where they have a lot of question marks. They kind of don't have that many players, and we're not really talking that much about it. I don't think anyone is, and that's weird. All right, we're going to be back tomorrow. Much more on Locked On Packers. Some juicy defensive line talk coming up. Some interviews here before we get to the NFL draft, and I'm really, really waiting on pins and needles for what happens with Aaron Rodgers. No, I'm not. I'm over it. I don't even know what to say at this point. I would just kind of like it to be done, but at the same time, I'm enjoying watching the Jets fans go through it. I really am, I have to say. What's up, Jets fans? Shout out. Now that I've said it on the stream, they're going to be in the comments. I promise. Just watch. Go look. Go check down there. They're there already. Bet. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live, like on a live stream talking about an Aaron Rodgers trade, you can do that to stay Locked On Packers.